My name is Nicole Lampe. I head the Water Hub at Climate Nexus, which is a nonprofit communications organization that works in service of the water and climate movements. And we're super excited to be hosting this panel discussion today about FEMA's newly designated community disaster resilience zones. Excuse me, these are 483 neighborhoods recently recognized for their risk of climate and weather disasters, as well as the high need for financial and technical assistance. These areas are eligible for special federal funding and support. And today we're going to hear from 5 community leaders who are working on resilience plans and projects to keep their neighbors safe from superstorms, rising seas, extreme heat and cold, and more, while also increasing green space, reducing pollution, creating jobs, and more. Our host today is Joyce Coffey from Climate Resilience Consulting. She's also on the board of Anthropocene Alliance, which is a partner in producing this event. And I'm going to hand it over to Joyce in just a moment to share more about the topic and the panelists. But I just wanted to briefly cover the flow for the 90 minutes. We're going to start with introductions from our panelists. We'll have a moderated discussion facilitated by Eric Tate of Princeton University, and then we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for a question and answer period from attendees. And with that, I will hand it over to Joyce.
Great, Nicole, thank you so much. And I want to welcome everyone. We are so glad that you chose to join this webinar today. I'm Joyce. As Nicole mentioned, I'm president of Climate Resilience Consulting, which is a social enterprise that focuses on saving lives and improving livelihoods in the face of climate change disruption. And I'm pleased to be a longstanding booster of the Anthropocene Alliance, which is affectionately known as A2. Many of you know that A2 combats climate change and environmental abuse by supporting community leaders in America's most impacted communities. As a national nonprofit, A2 provides money, grant-writing help, and access to government agencies and other nonprofit organizations for its nearly 300 member communities all around the U.S. You know, A2's membership has more than doubled in a year, and while there are just 483 community disaster resilience zones, or CDRZs, more than 1/6 of A2 members serve residents within those zones. You know, for most Americans living in CDRZs, the growing frequency and ferocity of climate change impacts make even more perilous the pre-existing risks of toxic contamination from Superfund sites, petrochemical industry, mining, logging, hazardous waste sites, infrastructure disinvestment, and a very long list of other perils. A2 members are volunteer leaders serving America's communities, and they have been fighting for justice for years, working to proactively fortify their communities and infrastructure to mitigate future risks. And of course, there are ever-increasing demands on A2 members, and their experience makes very plain that our current approach to disaster management is still inadequate. These are America's climate resilience leaders, and there is an urgent need for investment in their priorities for preparedness and prevention measures. It's really great that IRA is funding and has helped some of these communities. You'll hear from 4 of the 5 panelists today that are receiving EPA Community Change Equitable Resilience Technical Assistance. This is helping them develop shovel-ready projects suitable for applying to the $10 to $20 million EPA Community Change grant. Now more than ever, we really must rally our efforts behind these community leaders towards bolstering resilience and bridging the gap to ensure a safer and fairer future, which is where you come in. I appreciate that you are attending today's discussion, and I encourage you to ask of yourself as you hear from these experts, how can I broker power? How can I increase funding flows? How can I report facts? How can I shift policy? And how can I, in other ways, use my resources in creative and gritty ways to make the dream of Justice 40 a reality for this and future generations? And I'm really thrilled that we are joined in this work by Eric Tate, who will be moderating this discussion. Eric will be introducing himself in a moment, but I just wanted to mention that he is a professor at Princeton and also a national leader at the intersection of flood hazards, social inequality, and disaster resilience. And in addition to serving with me on the Anthropocene Alliance's board, he's on the board of the Resilient America Roundtable at the National Academies, and he also co-chairs their Committee on Spatial Screening Tools for Environmental Justice. If you don't know him for one of his many leadership roles, you're likely reading him right now because he is the co-lead author of the adaptation chapter of the fifth National Climate Assessment. So Eric, could I turn it over to you to introduce yourself briefly?
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, so I'm Eric Tate, and I'm a professor and researcher at the Center for Policy Research on Energy and the Environment at Princeton University. And I'm really happy to serve as moderator for this panel. Joyce talked and Nicole talked a little bit about CDRZs, which is essentially it's a data-driven approach for identifying the most at-risk communities. But these CDRZ zones, they're not just data points or places on a map. They're people that are living there that are facing challenges from prolonged exposure to natural hazards and pollution. But they're also, fighting to protect their communities. And so the organizations, the people that are represented here are examples, and they're getting some things done. And we want to talk about that today. So I'd like to start by letting each of our panelists introduce themselves. And so, Rebecca, why don't we start with you?
Thank you very much. Rebecca Jim. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation, and I'm executive director for a lead agency, which is a nonprofit working in Northeast Oklahoma. The issues that we deal with are everything from Superfund that impacts every single person that lives here, as well as flooding. And so the issues have changed lives here, and I believe shortened our lives. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of the panel.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hilton.
Yes, my name is Hilton Kelly, and I am the founder and director of the Community Empower and Development Association located in Port Arthur, Texas on the Gulf Coast. Every year we deal with chronic flooding, hurricanes, and what have you coming ashore and devastating our communities. And not to mention that Port Arthur is the home to the largest oil refinery in the Northern Hemisphere, which also have its fair share of problems whenever the waters rise and the hurricanes come ashore. With shutdowns and with startups, they pollute our air every season, and not to mention not just during hurricane season, but also through the months before throughout the year. So we are hopeful that we can shed some light on what's happening in our communities.
Thank you, Hilton. Julie.
Hi, I'm just, thanks for the opportunity to be here and to be able to talk with such great community leaders from other parts of the country. So I want to start by setting the record straight. I come from Owego, New York. It is not Oswego, New York. That is the college town. I live in a little small historic village along the Pennsylvania border that looks like a Hallmark movie set. But unfortunately, our Hallmark movie set was devastated by a flood in 2011 that left all but a couple blocks of the village underwater. And I want to echo what Rebecca said, because, the news cycle is short on a flood, but the devastation and the impact on our insides and outsides lasts for years. And so I had 3.5 feet of water in my house. 4 years after the flood, I elevated my house. It became the first house in the National Register of Historic Places in New York State to elevate for flood mitigation. And so I was safe, but so many of my neighbors weren't. And it's not okay. It's just not okay to live with this kind of risk. And I spent most of my career in academia, and I retired. And last year I took the plunge and I started this consulting company because there's so many communities like mine that need help.
Thanks, Julie. Arif?
Thank you, Eric. First, it's such a pleasure to be part of this discussion with so many great people doing good work across the country, and some amazing thinkers as well. And thanks to everyone who is listening. Arif Ullah, Executive Director of South Bronx Unite. In the South Bronx, we are and have been experiencing many of the same issues that unfortunately are common in frontline communities across the country. And that ranges from disproportionate pollution burden to very little protection from coastal storms and sea level rise. And I'm looking forward to expounding on that in a little bit.
Thanks, Arif. Carletta.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you to all of you who have put this panel together and this discussion together. It is much needed, and I'm honored to be a part of it. My name is Carletta Davis. I am the president of We Matter Community Association, located in the city of Pritchard, the city of Champions, and the city where the last slave ship was known to land here in the United States. We are a community association that is of the community and for the community. We came together as a result of what we call a chemical Katrina, and where we had 6,000 tons of mercaptan spilled into our groundwater. And that happened back in 2011, and we've been fighting ever since. And so again, I'm very pleased to be a part of this panel and hope to be able to shed a light on some of the things that we go through here as a frontline community in the Gulf Coast of Alabama. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so these are our 5 panelists. As Nicole mentioned earlier, what's going to happen is I have some questions and I'm going to ask of these folks for a while. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up to Q&A from everybody who's logged onto the webinar. There's a couple ways that you can ask questions, and you don't have to wait until the end to pose them. In Zoom, you can click on the Q&A link and put in a question. You can also use the chat function to enter a question or a comment as well, or if you have anything that needs clarification. Okay. So on that note, let's get started. Okay. So Hilton, why don't we start with you? We know that people didn't land in these high-risk areas on accident. Okay. And so maybe you could start by talking a little bit about the history of Port Arthur, Texas, and how did the Black community come to live in a marshland surrounded by water?
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, in the history of Port Arthur, number one, Port Arthur, Texas, just had its 125th anniversary. It was founded by Arthur Stilwell. Port Arthur is home to a large number of refineries and chemical plants, and most of those refineries and chemical plants are located on the west end of Port Arthur. Now, the unique thing about the west side of Port Arthur is that was the predominantly African-American community. This is where we were forced to live during the Jim Crow era. During the Jim Crow era, Blacks could not live on the other side of the railroad track, literally, that divides Black from white. And to this day, many African-Americans that still have property there, their grandparents and great-grandparents left them property and homes and what have you. And so many of the residents in that particular area, that's all they have. But yet, way back in during the Jim Crow era, they knew that West Port Arthur was a low-lying area, very much like what happened in Mississippi. Many African Americans were forced to live in the deltas, but yet this is our delta in Texas. And we learned to survive in those communities. We learned to thrive. And we dealt with flooding. As a child growing up here, I was born in 1960, and every year it would flood. We get, torrential rains. Periodically, we would get some strong storms, but it wasn't as frequent with hurricanes as it is now. Most hurricanes back then stayed south, down by Corpus Christi. But we flooding was something we became very familiar with. We learned to deal with by digging trenches. The elders would dig trenches from the back of their houses to run water to the main line. But now what we're seeing in those historic African-American communities here in Port Arthur is sea level rise. The flooding in the historic African-American community has become higher. The waters are becoming more frequent. The rainstorms that we're getting are more frequent, and not to mention the hurricanes that come ashore. But due to the fact that we were forced to live in those areas, many of us have set roots there, and we put all of our resources in the property that we have to keep it fixed and repaired, storm after storm after storm. And I do believe that assistance is needed by our federal and state government that helped to maintain us there during the Jim Crow era. I believe those same bodies should help us getting out of those areas, or at least to sustain ourselves in those low-lying areas here in the city of Port Arthur, Texas.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. It's a good reminder that, you know, the conditions of today, there's a historical through line to how, you know, how we got here. Carletta, many of these, you know, these hot spots in like cedar zones also have really crumbling infrastructure. Can you tell us a little bit about the water and sanitation systems in Pritchard, Alabama, and what kinds of problems are residents facing as a result of sort of longstanding disinvestment?
Well, thank you, Eric, for that question. Currently, our water system, as I understand it, is the second in the nation to go under receivership. And what that means is that the court has appointed someone to actually come in and run our water system. But prior to that, we've had years, decades of disenfranchisement and disinvestment from federal and state agencies into our water system. Currently, we purchase water from our neighboring municipality, which is Mobile. Our city sits just north of Mobile. And we're losing about 66% of the water that we purchase from Mobile into the ground out of failed lines. This lowers the water pressure. And if you know anything about water systems, if your water pressure is low, then you're susceptible to having infected water by bacteria. And so we've had people that have gotten ill from drinking the water. We have millions of gallons of sewage that has been spilt in our community. In fact, just last week, we had about 1 million gallons of raw sewage spilt in our community due to the heavy rains. And so we are in a dire situation here. The water is not safe to drink. I personally purchase water to eat and to cook and to drink, and so it is a dire situation. I think we're ranked number 2 in the nation to be the next Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah, so challenges with water infrastructure causing hazardous conditions. So we've heard from folks in Texas and Alabama. Let's move north to New York, Arif. Heard some of the challenges. Let's talk a little bit about some solutions. The South Bronx waterfront is heavily industrialized, but it's also it's in transition. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunity to turn this area into parks and other multi-benefit public spaces? And maybe a little bit about how greening can reduce flooding and urban heat.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Eric. And I do want to just offer a little bit of background and context for those of you who are not familiar with the South Bronx. What we are looking at in terms of a landscape is on our waterfront right now, just focused on our waterfront. We are on a peninsula. Many community members don't even know that the water is right there because there is absolutely no access to the water. So other parts of New York City have been experiencing a waterfront renaissance in the form of raised promenades, green spaces, etc. Instead, our waterfront is full of polluting facilities ranging from power plants. We have two peak power plant sites to waste transfer stations. We have a waste management facility that processes the household waste of the entire Bronx, as well as other waste. We have other waste transfer facilities, including recycling stations. We have last mile warehouses, so Fresh Direct, FedEx. We have a medical waste facility. We have a home heating oil facility. These are all concentrated in one area on our waterfront. And what makes this even more upsetting is that that is public land. That is New York State Department of Transportation land that most of these facilities sit on, that have been leased to a company that then subleased it to all of these polluting facilities. So in short and in essence, our tax dollars are subsidizing the poisoning of our air. Okay. And on top of these polluting structures, we have several highways and byways. I won't get into that, right? But the highways and expressways essentially encircle, slice through, and strangle our community. So all of these polluting sources, polluting facilities, polluting structures have contributed to, of course, alarmingly high asthma rates, but also a whole host of other illnesses, including infant mortality, cognitive impairment, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, dementia, all of which are correlated, if not caused, by air pollution. That's our landscape. That is what we're dealing with. And this, we have to understand in the historical context, Eric, this is a legacy of redlining. For us, redlining continues to exist in what I'm just describing to you, right? And we are continuing to endure discriminatory public policies. So the community came together and re-envisioned this waterfront to be a space that could actually contribute to health instead of destroy and compromise health. The community envisioned on this waterfront 7 green spaces interconnected by a green way. And these green spaces would serve the purpose of creating direly needed spaces like this. So there's only one real green space that serves the entire community, which is about 60,000 people. So there's only one real green space that does that. The little parks that we have, they're more heat traps than they are parks, because they covered in asphalt and concrete. There's no greenery. And that's another impact of climate change, right? When we talk about, how communities like ours are impacted, well, we also have what's called the urban heat island effect, right? Which exacerbates the respiratory illnesses brought on by pollution. So this green space that we've envisioned, that our community has envisioned, would create direly needed green space. It would also provide some level of pollution mitigation from all of the polluting structures and businesses around us. And of course, it would strengthen coastal resilience. We are in what's called a level B flood zone, so very vulnerable to flooding. All of this vital infrastructure that I just mentioned, there is no protection for these facilities from sea level rise and coastal storms. And so our plan, which we partnered with landscape architects, engineers, hydrologists, et cetera, to develop, our plan would create coastal resilience, both to protect the community as well as to protect other infrastructure in the community that is needed for the community. Right now, we are applying for a community change grant for sections of our waterfront plan. The entire waterfront plan simply couldn't be paid for, even with $20 million. It is in New York City, and also things have just gotten very expensive. So we are working with a really excellent team to prepare an application to submit to the community change grant, to be able to finally make this dream that the community has had for years a reality.
Yeah, so once again, sort of these long-standing legacy issues, in many cases abetted, facilitated by government to create these challenging situations, but yet here, applying, coming together, organizing to reimagine this waterfront and, combat the effects of pollution in urban heat island. Thank you. We're going to go a couple 100 miles north of the Bronx and hear from Julie. So she's from the rural village of Owego, as she
Thank
said.
you.
And, bit of a different set of problems and solutions. Can you talk a little bit about the flood risk there, Julie, and how, your approach for addressing it in your village?
Yeah, so the U.S. Climate and Economic Justice Tool says that in Owego, 72% of the population has household incomes less than 2 times the poverty level. Riskfactor.com, if you've ever looked at flood factor or risk factor, it's a great website. If you've never gone there, go there. And that says 82% of buildings in the village are in the 100-year floodplain. And so for my village, that's 943 buildings out of like 1,100 something with extreme flood risk. So, it's economically disadvantaged and we're really vulnerable. And you're like, oh my God, why would you want to live there? Because it's a fabulous little community. Despite that, and we don't flood every year, right? Everyone's, a hurricane will come through and it's going to get us and it's going to get us again. But for the vast majority of the time, it's a wonderful place that we need to protect. And so, I think an important point is that, like everybody else here on this panel, we're the boots on the ground people, right? We look at this day to day and see how this plays out. And over the years of doing this, it's become very important to me to look at this inclusively, right? I mean, these are wicked problems and no two communities are the same. And there is no one solution. And for me personally, if we look at this as an us versus them thing, it's really not productive. So, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I mean, I've worked with the town, the county, FEMA, DEC, the Army Corps, A2, right? And A2, shout out to A2. Boy, you give people who don't always get a voice. So keep going. Because for underserved communities and all of these communities, it's finding our voice. That's one of the hardest things to do. And we need all that support. So, I mean, we wrote a Climate Smart Communities grant with a private partner. We got $125,000. That was kind of the first grant to try to get into the community rating system and reduce flood insurance. I connected with the Army Corps of Engineers. And, writing an Army Corps grant is not that hard. You work with them, they help you. And we're actually the first community in the United States to have the 50% match waived under the Planning Assistance to States program. So we got $300,000 to have our stormwater system, which is a disaster, assessed and studied. And also, so the community picked 15 representative buildings and is saying, Army Corps, what do we do to save these buildings? How can we do that? Not tearing them down. How can we mitigate them and keep them as a part of our community? And so, another big thing we did this fall of this winter is our hazard mitigation plan update was due. And so for our village annex to that plan, we used a community informed process and we had 5 public meetings. We had a community municipal committee and it was a lot of work, but it really was an amazing experience. And it's the first time that I really felt like the community is getting it. Like there's this change of people, really internalizing that we have to take action here and that we can. And so we just submitted a BRIC. BRIC is Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities, Direct Technical Assistance, DTA. So That's really important, right? In underserved communities, we need technical assistance as much as we need money. And so what we did was, now we had this great community informed hazard mitigation plan, and we applied in BRIC DTA to say, FEMA, get us help to do the things that we've outlined in this plan. And in New York State, we have climate smart communities and clean energy communities. We're utilizing those programs, utilizing overlap. And a huge thing about these programs is that they come with real human support, not a website, but a person. And those people are there to help you. And we are making so much progress. And I just got an email yesterday that NYSERDA wants to take the people away in 2026. So I would be happy to talk to anybody about why that is a terrible idea. We need to tell NYSERDA, do not take away these people. It is super important. We're hoping to get $250,000 in clean energy funding. Impossible without our clean energy communities coordinator, who's done a fantastic job. So in summary, what we're doing, the way we're approaching it, is by thoughtfully looking at the programs that are out there, trying to pick ones that, you know, we can use synergistically. And, you know, it's one step forward, 2 steps back, but we keep going, and there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, excellent reminders about, I mean, I heard some themes in what you're saying around sort of a bottom-up processes that are community informed, inclusive, collaborative with various groups, and involves, Arif brought this up too, sort of, you know, raising funds through grants to, you know, pursue these community needs. Just a reminder, if anybody in the audience, if you have any questions that will, you know, when we get to the Q&A section, you can enter it into the chat in Zoom, or you can also use the Q&A button in Zoom, and we will try and address those questions when we get to that point in the program. So far we've heard a little bit about some, you know, some natural hazards and some pollution hazards. Rebecca, you're in a situation where you're facing both and some intersections among them. So, you know, a lot of research shows that communities vulnerable to climate disasters are also overburdened by pollution. Can you talk a little bit about how flood risk and toxic mining waste compound in their effects for, you know, in your community in Oklahoma?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I'd like to tell you where we are. We're in the middle of the country. We don't have oceans. We're not really at risk for hurricanes. We do have tornadoes, but we do have flooding. And what we know now is that the floods that we're experiencing do not have to happen. We know that all climate change is made, but ours is actually made by how the rainwater coming from Kansas into our state and down our rivers and down our streams and creeks all go into a reservoir, actually a drinking water reservoir that holds water too long. And it's a hydro dam, and they hold the water too long, and what we experience is backwater flooding. What makes that even worse is what's above us. We in this county, we have one of the oldest Superfund sites in the nation. It was one of the largest lead and zinc mines in the world. Abandoned mine waste piled into mountains, and all of that can be airborne, but also is used throughout the county as a building material, which I want to talk about in just a moment. But all of our mining was done underground, and so they were actually mining an aquifer. And when they quit mining, quit pumping the water out of that aquifer, it began to fill up. It is recharged every time it rains. And so coming out of the mines every day is it's 1.5 million gallons of toxic water coming out, flowing down our creek, Tar Creek actually. And when that backwater happens for us and the flooding occurs, it is toxic water that's sitting in these houses in the neighborhoods and in the schoolyards and in the parks along the way. So it's the heavy metals in there is the ones that we know are most harmful to children. So we have a high rate of lead poisoning in our area, and it is above national average and has been for the last 30 years. We know that. But in that mine waste is also many other metals we know that are harmful to people, and that would be cadmium, arsenic, manganese. But as a building material, they used it in building construction underneath the homes of neighborhood after neighborhood, probably 1,000 homes in our community, has mine waste underneath their homes that has the heating and air conditioning ducts buried into. There is enough sulfur in our chip that it actually creates a sulfuric acid and eats through the heating and air conditioning ducts, making those toxic dust blown through the houses every day. Now those ducts wouldn't get dangerous if they didn't get wet. And they get wet for 3 different ways. They get wet if there's a plumbing leak. They get wet with groundwater intrusion, and they get wet when we're flooded and filled with water. And so we have a situation that I really have a lot of hope for now. You know, sometimes you think, wow, that's a mess. But I do really have a lot of hope with the Community Change Grant, with several other grants that are coming along right now. We have qualified for the technical assistance, and we're going to need it because they're complicated grants, and we need the help. And I'm so excited that we'll be able to have it in several of the layers of help we need. But our whole county is a Superfund site for that chat use. And there is a gathering of EPA officials coming soon to reevaluate. Are we doing everything we ought to do now? That there is a new change in the amount of lead in soil that can be allowed. And so there's going to be a reevaluation of the whole county and how that's done. I could not tell you how nervous I am that it won't work, but I do believe it can. We asked for EPA and FERC, who is the licensing agent for the dam that floods us, to reevaluate the new license. And we're hoping that will happen. We asked for an MOU so that EPA and FERC have to talk about the fact that when we flood, it's a toxic. And there is an MOU now. So we believe we're moving all of these agencies together, putting people at risk, and giving us all hope finally. So we're on the edge.
Yeah. One sort of commonality is, y'all are expressing these challenges, but also how, infusion of external resources of different sorts can actually, they are making a difference. And so Hilton, I'd like to return to you a little bit. This whole idea of of designating these CDRZ zones, right? These community disaster resilience zones, is to highlight, identify, prioritize high-risk areas to receive targeted support. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the financial and technical help that CEDA has received for work on resilience work in Port Arthur, and also you can offer to other communities?
Well, certainly. Well, we too are applying for a change grant, and we have been working very closely with Anthropocene Alliance. Anthropocene Alliance has been a godsend when it comes to finding support for our community, and I mean, standing on what they say, standing on their word, with getting that help boots on the ground. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, we had a team of people come through. The Environmental Protection Agency visited Port Arthur yesterday, along with the design team that's going to embark upon designing our green infrastructure program that we plan to implement throughout the city of Port Arthur. But we're focusing right now in an area called Montrose. Montrose is like a suburb to Port Arthur. It is a part of Port Arthur, but yet it is one of the most lowest areas in the city of Port Arthur. When Hurricane Harvey hit in 2017, most of the homes, 80% of Port Arthur was flooded, even in areas where they said it was a no flood area. Most people got 3 to 4 feet of water in their homes, but in the Montrose area, these people suffered 5 and 6 feet to 8 feet of water inside their homes. I stood into a house where the water line was about 2 feet above my head, and I'm 6'2". And so Miss Beatrice, she's like the mother of the Montrose area. It's an old community, but it's a well-knit community. They have a beautiful church that people have attended there for years and years, and they still attend that church today. And it also brings the community together. So we're going to start there with more green infrastructure projects. We did a rain garden last year. We did a permeable pavement project also in that same area last year. And we are also looking at plants that can also contribute to absorbing water. And we looked at ways in which we can help drain water off the land as soon as the rain stops. But historically, what has happened in the Montrose area, very much like in West Port Arthur, is the water would stand sometime for days and days and days because the drainage system is antiquated. It's just inefficient. Not to mention whenever it floods in key areas like Montrose and West Port Arthur, well, the sewer system backs up. It literally bubbles up out of the manholes, and it is a health hazard. And it's awful to live in a situation like that, week after week after week, until they finally get the pumps going and get that water moving again. But yet, this is a pervasive problem that must be resolved. And yet, we are very, very happy to be a part of this change grant opportunity, along with this design team, to really get things moving in the city of Port Arthur, because our municipalities can't do it alone. Many of them, I just don't believe they have the wherewithal to understand how to go after much of the funding that is out there, nor do they have the will. I think that many municipalities, particularly here in Port Arthur, I believe that they look at our communities as just a place that, you know, people complain a lot, but yet they need to visit those areas. They need to see for themselves, and they actually know what's going on, but they just turn a deaf ear to our cries. So we are very, very excited about this change grant opportunity, and also embarking upon this grant with Anthropocene Alliance to help get things going. But yet we need those resources. We need those resources to do more green infrastructure projects, because this is definitely something that works. Because like in Houston, Texas, for instance, there is so much concrete. There is no green space hardly within the downtown area. Even in the 5th Ward, that was once a thriving community, but when they built I-10, there was so much concrete poured into those areas. So now, anytime it rains, it floods, in the Fifth Ward. I mean, and that's a predominantly African-American community that was divided and broke up due to development, and the water just stands to the point to where sometimes even the alligators come out of the bayous and you see them walking down the side of the freeway, literally. It was on the news once. And yet, you know, the cities are doing, I guess, whatever they can, but they need to do more with trying to understand how can we build and have that, have what we build complement nature. And let's work together with nature to create better drainage systems. But we can't just keep pouring concrete and expecting the water to drain or absorb back into the ground when it's blocked by all the concrete that we pour. We have to build smart. We have to build according to nature, to where nature can work with us on mitigating some of the floodwaters that come into our communities. Now, not only do we have to deal with the floodwaters themselves, but I live next to the largest oil refinery in the Northern Hemisphere, which is Motiva. Motiva Oil Refinery puts out 635,000 barrels of oil per day. Next to the Motiva Oil Refinery, we have the Valero Oil Refinery. And next to Valero, we have Chevron Chemical. And next to Chevron Chemical, we have Oxbow Petroleum Calcining Facility, which take petroleum coke and further make road material out of it. And this is all petroleum material. But whenever it rains and it floods, well, that water on those refinery grounds sometimes seep out into the community because you just can't control how much water can flow in and out of an area, particularly when you have torrential rains or you have a flash flood. And much of that water, contaminated water, flow into the community. You can see the oil sheens on top of the water. And when your car is disabled and you have to leave your home, you have no choice but to walk into that polluted water. Not to mention power lines are down. I mean, we've had a couple of people that have died from standing in floodwaters, and power lines have dropped into the water, and we know how that ends. So there's a lot of hazards. I mean, a lot of people think of flooding, well, it's no big deal, but yes, it's a lot of hazards in those waters, and we have to learn to mitigate those waters, build our infrastructure better, and also build with green infrastructure programs as well.
Yeah, that's excellent reminder. And, you know, you along with Rebecca really pointed to this, you know, we shouldn't be thinking about these hazards in isolation. They're spatially coincident, and hazard's a hazard, and they're causing challenges, and we need to be thinking about them, solutions in sort of a multifaceted way. Carletta, let's turn back to you. So let's say we can imagine what true resilience looks like. What would that look like in Pritchard? And, you know, what kinds of projects do you have underway there?
Well, again, thank you. That's a great question. For us, resiliency looks like self-empowerment. And self-empowerment has to be resourced. I've often been asked the question, why with all of the efforts and funding and programs, have we not seen a true change in EJ communities? And my response to that is oftentimes the resources don't go to the people that actually do the work, right? I'm talking about the people that would do the work without the resources anyway. You know, the ones that are going into their back pockets, that are helping their neighbors. They're the ones that are going to make the change and that are going to make the community resilient. But oftentimes, they're the very ones that don't get resourced. And so, for us to see a resilient community means that the community has to be well resourced, it has to be educated. Um, I think that there has been a concerted effort to miseducate our community. Oftentimes, our community is gaslit when there are issues that are brought up. Um, and the powers that be will intentionally give wrong information to the community so that the community goes away. And so I think that the brain drain in our community has to be shored up. We have to make sure that we're able to talk technical, is what I like to say. And so we need that technical assistance. We need to be able to speak truth to power. I think that for a long time, our communities have kind of sat back and waited for things to change, those in power to have goodwill towards our community. And that has been a failed approach, even with people that we elect that look like us, right? And so I think that we have got to learn that we have a voice, and that we have power. And so when we do that, then we become more resilient. We are working currently on a project. We were selected for the equitable technical assistance through the EPA for the Change Grant. And one of the key things that we are very laser focused on is being able to source our own water. Pritchard is, I live in a city called 8 Miles. We're 8 miles from the bay. And sort of like a reef, we don't have, we're on water and near water, but we don't have access to it. We don't know that we even have it. And so what we are doing, we're working with our technical assistance architects to come up with a plan to submit for the Change Grant that will give access back to the community to a creek that is a beautiful creek that can be a source for our water eventually somewhere down the line. But we could have that also for recreation and to be able to have a better quality of life and be able to fish and do the things that you do when it comes to being a waterfront community. We also are going to mitigate flooding. Again, we have a severe flooding problem in our community due to failed infrastructure and disinvestment in our infrastructure. And so, we want to make sure that we are creating wetlands, that we are restoring wetlands, that if we do build, that we are consciously building out in what we call the 500-year floodplain area. We're creating rain gardens and things of that nature, just green infrastructure. So that's going to kind of be the basis of our plan. But the ultimate goal, again, is to give this community back its natural resource, which is water, which is life. Water is life, right? And to put that in the hands of someone else just really minimizes and diminishes this community. And so we want to take that back. So that's where we are at this point.
Yeah, definitely themes of community empowerment. I also heard a little bit of overlap with what Arif was saying earlier about sort of re-envisioning the waterfront and thinking about its intersection with natural infrastructure and doing that. So Arif, I'd like to turn back to you now. With your work with South Bronx Unite, like what's going on in terms of engaging residents in your work?
Yeah, critical to any organizing effort in frontline communities. Really, self-determination is what we are advancing, and these movements have to have us at the forefront. And so the organization was founded by and continues to be led by community residents. And so, in the DNA of the organization is that value built in, frontline led, resident led. And so all of the projects that we have and that we are working on, were conceived by and are being, if not led, but at least informed by community members, people who are living the injustices and the inequities that I described earlier. And so one of the things that we have done that has been really helpful in both envisioning plans, but also in harvesting ideas and getting people excited about those ideas are visioning sessions. And so, we get folks together, we have large maps, they're able to actually, see the areas that, we are sort of presenting them to them to, dream of a different landscape, and then they're able to really share their ideas, and then we can work with architects and engineers to take it from there. So it's not the other way around, right? And I heard Carlotta and Hilton both talking a little bit about this, and you too, Rebecca, where it's the community that's doing the envisioning, and the TA providers or whoever else is on our team, right? They're supporting that vision, right? And not the other way around, where a landscape architect firm is envisioning a certain space and then soliciting the support and input later of community members. And so that's a critical piece, and that's something that is a threat across all of our work, even when we partner with large academic institutions on data collection, for example. We have a couple of partnerships with Columbia University. This is a massive institution, and a lot of these large institutions, I think we all know, have been guilty of sort of treating communities like ours as lab experiments, where they collect data and that data is basically taken out and we have no idea what happens to it. But we've been able to form these types of partnerships where it's the community that owns the data, it's the community that's determining the ideas and informing the ideas, if not leading the ideas. So these types of visioning sessions, always community outreach. We have a lot of community events, and our events always have music and food, and we want to be able to, culture is part of what we do. It makes no sense to ignore culture in the organizing work we do. So constant outreach to folks, whether that's hitting the pavement with flyering, or you using social media, getting the word out through newsletters, and other channels. But these are the ways that we engage community, and this is the way that community has really led the effort. Again, it is the community's vision that is front and center.
Oh, that's nice. Let's go, Julie. So based on your experience, thinking about sort of what federal agencies can do, what could FEMA, other agencies, state agencies do to help make Justice 40 goals more achievable? Of course, a lot of the CDRZ work, especially the CJES tool, which is from the CEQ, has been used to help designate these CDR zones, are developed in support of Justice 40. What could these other agencies do to help make these goals more achievable?
So I kind of come to this by way of a story. And so after the 2011 flood in Owego, with outside support, FEMA HMGP grant was written and 30 houses were approved for elevation. That's great, right? So guess how many elevated? 4. Only 4. So why did that happen? Right? I was one of those 4. I could take advantage of that funding. And so as a scientist, it's a pretty big problem to tackle. And I could do it. And I had the skills to do the research. But there's something profoundly wrong with the system if you have to be a scientist to be able to elevate your house. Right? This is really what we need to change. And I was so frustrated back then because I kept saying to the village, get the people in the room and I will help them do this because we all need to do this. And I kept asking, and they were never calling that meeting. And I was so frustrated. And then, that was in 2015. Now, after years of being an advocate for the community, I totally understand why. And it's because there is no way that my village could have processed 30 elevations. Our DPW never could have handled it. It is what it means to be disadvantaged. It was when the light bulb goes on and you go, oh, I get it now. We don't have a planner. We don't even have a certified floodplain manager, and 82% of the village is in the 100-year floodplain. We don't have a grant writer. We don't have a grant administrator. How are we supposed to do this? And so this is, to me, a big takeaway for me, everybody out there listening. You can't just stick the pot of money in the project funds. You can, if you want all the rich communities to get the money, because they have the grant writers and the staff and the grant administrators, and they can do it all, but we can't. So even with funding to get the grant, without funding to administer the grant, 26 families are still living in fear of the river. And God, that's a shame. And so in Owego, there were buyouts and there were elevations. And I just got the data from the village and I was kind of horrified. 53 houses have been torn down in the village of Owego. 8 have been elevated. And God, I want that to be the other way around. Because there's just no reason for it. But why does it happen? Because it's a lot easier to tear down a house than to elevate it. There is no question about that. It is a lot easier to tear it down. And then I just go back to, in the 60s, you listen to Kennedy and he talked about going to the moon. And he said, we don't go there because it's easy. We go because it's hard. And we have to go there now because it's hard. We have to figure this out. We have to elevate these houses. We need the workforce. This is a whole workforce development opportunity. We have to develop the curriculum. We have to we have to train this workforce to mitigate these buildings. I just gave a plenary talk at the Illinois Floodplain Managers meeting. There is not a single elevation company in the state of Illinois. Without the workforce, we can't do it. But with the workforce, we can. And we need to develop that workforce to do it. And we need to do this while the sky is blue, right? We could wait for the next disaster, wait for everybody's mental health to be destroyed, wait for the family photos in your wedding pictures to be gone underwater, wait for your medical records to be gone. I have no medical records before 2011 in my village because the doctor's office flooded out. Or we can say, let's take this money and put it in protecting the buildings in the first place. And let's keep these people healthy and keep the communities healthy. And so making change is hard. And, in the village, we've come where we've come because there has been a very dedicated small cohort of very determined people. And I'm sure that every other panelist in here is like, yep, that's what happens in our community too. But we all know, and you got to have your one person in the government that's going to push your agenda, right? I have my one person who pushes it, but this is really hard work. This is like, I go one step forward, 2 steps back, and it's work that's very subject to burnout. And we all burn out because we are all human. And we need to institutionalize this kind of support. And like I said before, right? I don't want a website. I want a person that can really help. And so over the past year or 2, I've actually worked quite closely with FEMA Region 2. My colleague Jason is on this call, developing a model and trying to work through how could we make place-based support for communities, because this is what we need. How can we make these resilience hubs? And one of the ideas that, there's been a lot of discussion about is cooperative extension, right? Cooperative extension, it's everywhere. It's in every state. It's in every county. Like, why can't the government say that it's a priority to fund cooperative extension, that in addition to helping you identify, what's eating the plants in your yard, they can also say, we have a resilience officer and we have somebody here to help you. And if we could do that, cooperative extension, there's also another piece of this to me as a former academic, right? Cooperative extension sits between a community and between researchers, right? And that's an important place to be, because if that role could be truly made, then they can liaise between the community and the academics, because academic research, it's, we don't want extractive research in communities, right? And that happens. That's not what we want. We don't want to be your guinea pig. We want to be at the table with you. We want you to say, what do you need? And if we could have cooperative extension in the middle, forging the relationships with the communities, they have the relationships with the researchers, get everybody at the table and develop an agenda that truly serves everybody, and let all parties be respected and learn from each other. So, that's one idea of many, but we need to just look towards such ideas to find a way to enable community to help community and to help everybody adapt.
Yeah, I'm hearing some themes of, true collaborative partnerships, and community self-determination, right? And some real challenges with resource deployment. It's a lot more systems and structures and support that's needed to translate resource access to actual solutions. We got one more question before we open up for Q&A, and I'm going to ask this of Rebecca. So we hear a lot about sort of natural resources and natural infrastructure. A lot of times with natural resources, it's used in sort of an extractive kind of connotation. But can you talk a little bit about the role of just, healthy creeks and wetlands and meadows and keeping communities safe from extreme weather and pollution?
Well, thank you very much. One of the things that we've been doing for many years is advocating for this creek that runs through the town of Miami, Oklahoma. It's like the other Main Street running down the way, but 44 years ago, it became polluted, and it is still, even though it is really still very dangerous for children, they've just rediscovered it, and they are swimming and playing and building and creating joyous opportunities there, but it's still too dangerous to even picnic. And so telling people to stay out of a beautiful place is tiresome, and what we really need to do is make it not be dangerous. And so what we've been advocating all this time is really clean up the source, and let's bring this resource back to the community. Let's do that. And we have, as community members, the most we can do is push federal agencies like the EPA and the Superfund program to do the work that they have to do. And for us, one first good step is they actually partnered with the tribes here, and two things they've done. And let me explain why that's really important. In this little corner of the state of Oklahoma, 9 major tribes in the nation were crammed in here and relocated in a forced removal when their homelands were taken from them, and they throughout they came from various parts of the country and wedged in here. It was like a Tower of Babel with the different languages that were crammed in all at once. But underneath that tribal land were resources that have now since poisoned the rest of the downstream tribes. The EPA has, for the first time, given the Quapaw tribe a contract to do the cleanup on their own land. And that's, I think, a very good first start in having capacity to do the work that makes your own lives better. And just like Carletta said earlier, that water is life, it really is. But life, it's sustaining, but it is the source of life, but it is also the source and can be the source of joy. And we're hoping to have that restored for us, and then have it not flood us either. But we've partnered with a couple of universities through the years, and one of them is the Harvard School of Design with Neil Kirkwood, and he's actually brought and had 2 studios of landscape designers come up with the designs that we can now use as templates in these change grant applications. What could it look like? And then we were also granted the National Fish and Wildlife America Beautiful grant. Just like Arif was saying, let's vision and use that term of really holding the community together in those kinds of settings so they can dream together. And what do we want it to look like? And how do we restore the tallgrass prairie, which is what we had here along much of this landscape? How do we make that happen again? And who do we have to have in the room? We have to have the people that live on the land now in the room making those decisions. So I once again am very hopeful for the change that this influx of money can bring, but the technical help that comes with it to help us dream together in those ways to make life different here. The other thing that we're doing is really calling for the rights of nature for Tar Creek, this damaged place. We're hoping very soon to have the city of Miami, Oklahoma, pass that as an ordinance that the city will enforce and protect this damaged place from getting more damages. The other thing that I really hope that you all will do is understand that we are advocating for the protection of other streams. We do not want any more tar creeks ruined. And what we're finding here in the state of Oklahoma, and maybe you'll see it in other states around the country, we believe it's happening, is the rush for mining and the rush for other essential elements are going to poison the future places that have not been touched yet. And so that is our mantra. No more tar creeks. Don't please, all of you, be the stewards of your communities and do not let that happen. We had the essential elements in the early part of the 20th century that was needed. That was lead and zinc. They needed it, and the companies that extracted here do not clean up their mess, and they will come to other communities around the country. And so when we think about how do we protect this resource, sometimes we have to stand up for it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Those are some nice comments to close up the panel. Before we have some questions in the Q&A, but before we do so, we have another participant, Crystal Bergman from White House Council on Environmental Quality, or Council on Environmental Quality. And so, Crystal, I understand you have some few comments you'd like to share.
Thank you so much. I will be very brief. I just wanted to introduce myself. And so again, my name is Crystal Bergman. I'm the Senior Director for Climate Resilience at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, and just wanted to be here to listen. I'm grateful and humbled to be here to hear these powerful stories, to hear this powerful expertise. And I'll be sure to share all of this with my colleagues at CEQ and elsewhere throughout the White House and the federal government. Our role here in CEQ is to coordinate the federal government's efforts to improve, preserve, protect America's public health and environment. And in my role, focusing on climate resilience, we work very closely with our environmental justice team, as well as other federal agencies, to reduce harm in communities with environmental justice concerns, help federal agencies deliver on the benefits of historic investments in climate, clean energy, water, infrastructure, many of the other priorities that we heard speak about today, and to institutionalize and advance environmental justice across the work of the federal government. So again, very grateful to be invited to listen to your expertise here today, and look forward to hearing the Q&A as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Crystal. So we have just a few minutes left, and maybe we can do these Q&A questions as a bit of a lightning round. So I'll pose a question to the panel. Don't feel like everyone needs to respond. And if we get a good answer, we can go on to the next question. So I'm going to start with one from Eva. She says, has the CDRZ zone designation helped any of you do the work you're pursuing? And if so, how?
I'll answer that, Eric. I can say that it has helped in that we were afforded the equitable technical assistance, which actually gave us, I'm in real estate or from real estate, and to do that pre-development work on a project, on a construction project, can be very costly. So for us to be able to get that technical assistance with the architects and the engineers and all of those professions was paramount. So it has really really helped us.
I'll just say that we just submitted a BRIC DTA grant. And so as a FEMA CDRZs community, that gives us, there's a priority for that. I don't know if we've got it yet. I actually just got an email today to set up a meeting to discuss our proposal, but that's how that's how it's impacting us right now.
That's the same here in Port Arthur, Texas. But we have had a lot of great work done through other programs. We had a NIFWIF grant that we applied for, and we achieved getting that. But yet the green infrastructure is well underway, as I stated earlier, in the Montrose area, and we have boots on the ground when it comes to EPA, walking through to get a better understanding of what's needed in our community, not to mention the design team. So we feel very positive that we will be receiving the change grant. We're going to stay positive in that. And I do believe it's going to happen for our area, and a lot of lives will be transformed because of that support and the technical support as well.
Mm-hmm. Another question is from Martha. And this speaks to sort of this intersection of pollution and natural hazards. She says, I skimmed a FEMA disaster preparedness report, and it didn't say much about sanitation, sewers, or temporary bathroom facilities during or after disaster. Where did this question go?
Apologies, marked it as answering live. She finished asking, do you think it doesn't rate as a big problem or that the taboos around poo and pee keep it from being mentioned?
Thank you, Nicole.
Well, I can certainly speak to the fact that it needs to be addressed. It is a major issue, particularly in our community, because in EJ communities, they tend to be the last community who gets the light switch flipped on, if you will. And so, we don't have those basic human services after a storm sometimes for a week to 2 weeks, even if it depending on how bad the storm is. And so I don't know why it's not addressed, but it definitely needs to be.
Yeah, in the South Bronx, we have several what's called combined sewer overflow outputs. New York City has this antiquated sewer system where every time it rains, both the rainwater and sewage water is treated by the same infrastructure. And so what that means, there's no way for that system to process both things at once in any meaningful way. So a lot of sewage water just gets dumped into our waterways. What makes that worse is that a lot of that sewage waste from upriver, from wealthier communities, because of river flow, end up in our community. And so this is yet another example of another way that we are shouldering a burden that is, it's inequitably distributed.
My gathering from FEMA and having gone through, let's see here, I've been through Hurricane Rita. That was in 2005, Hurricane Gustav, like in 2006, Hurricane Ike, 2008, Harvey, 2017, and Laura, I think that was in 2021. We've gone through numerous hurricanes, and it seems like every time FEMA hits the ground, they want to come in to your home and tell you basically why you're not going to receive funding rather than how can we work with you. And what I find that many of the FEMA inspectors aren't really qualified for the job. I mean, most of the time they'll come in and they'll try to inspect your walls if your house has shifted on its foundation, and they'll tell you, well, we don't believe that crack developed there during the storm. And how do you assess that when you're not even a contractor, you're not even a construction inspector, you're not even qualified. So I think FEMA needs to do a better job at understanding what communities need. Number one, we need educated people to be on the ground, assessing our homes, assessing what the needs are. I think they need to do a study of what people have gone through when in the face of all these storms, not only in Port Arthur and in Texas on the Gulf Coast, but around this nation. And we need to get qualified people when assessing property, and you want to start divvying out funds. Well, most of the time our property is devalued in the 77640 area code, which is predominantly people of color. We always get at least maybe 25% of what the contractors who bid on your house to repair it is basically needing to repair it. When in other more affluent communities where homes are in upwards of $300,000, maybe $400,000, most of the time these folks, they put in a bid and they get a second dip at 100% of what they need. And not to mention the city and the municipalities here, they tell you, well, we're not going to help you elevate your home because it's in a flood zone. Well, hell, you guys knew it was in a flood zone when you forced us to live there back in the 1940s and 50s. Now that the waters are getting higher, you're telling me you can't help me when it was your fault that I was put there and I was maintained in those areas and forced to live in those areas, not only on a local level, but a state and federal level. So you don't feel that FEMA doesn't feel like they owe us something in getting us out of those areas that we were forced to live in. So FEMA need to do a better job at assessing how can we help people that are not necessarily stuck in these areas, but have learned to thrive in these areas, and how can we help them to sustain themselves there and build sustainably and resiliently if we choose to stay. But yet if we choose to leave, we should be given the opportunity to do so and the assistance.
Thank you, Hilton. We're running short on time. I think we have time for one more question. And this one's from Michaela. And she says, what's the best way for environmental groups to partner with you and assist your communities in achieving your goals at, different scales, local or even national?
Well, for us, I think that the best way to partner is to continue to give best practices, successes. You know, we don't like to reinvent the wheel over here. So those things that have worked well in other communities, you know, we need to find a way of sharing that and networking. And also just, you know, the support. Even if you could, you know, write a letter of support saying, hey, you know, we support this community's getting, you know, resiliency funding due to X, Y, and Z. You know, just being able to know that we have a team behind us also helps us, you know, just continue to want to do this work. Because as Julie said, you know, that burnout is real, right? And I just think that creating a strong network is invaluable.
Okay. Well, we've reached the end of our time. And I want to thank everybody for joining us on this call. I hope, you know, the presentations and the descriptions by the panelists have helped give a better understanding of, you know, some of the challenges that communities are facing, but also some of the solutions that resources are helping to unlock, and some of the needs and some of the hopefulness going forward. So on behalf of Joyce, Nicole, Harriet, and Anthropocene Alliance, I'd like to thank you for attending. Joyce, do you have any final comments to send us off?
Well, I mean, I want to just really give deep thanks to Rebecca and Hilton and Julie and Arif and Carletta, because you've just given all of us so much energy. And I hope to goodness that we can continue to energize the extraordinary work you are leading for the nation. You're doing this work for your communities. And by being here today and doing many other things that are so generous, you're also helping many communities that could not be here today. And, you know, it's just extraordinary what you've had to come from to continue to lead and be courageous and resilient. And, you know, we all wish you the absolute best. You deserve every bit of what you've been asking for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.